And NASA is still one of those institutions that has, in the eyes of the public, it has a lot of credibility still. And I think they want to make sure that they're staying in front of this so that they don't get caught with their pants down. And because then people, of course, are going to want to know, how long have you known about this and why have you been keeping it from the public? I mean, think about it. Let's say that tomorrow the Pentagon, somebody from the Pentagon holds a press conference and announces that we are being, quote unquote, visited by intelligent extraterrestrials. Well, where are most of the heads going to turn next? To NASA. They're going to look at NASA and say, excuse me? I mean, if we're being visited by extraterrestrials and you guys have been sending these rockets up and you got the International Space Station and you got cameras out there, what's the deal here? How come you haven't told us? They're inextricably linked with whatever the Pentagon decides to do in terms of with whatever the Pentagon discloses regarding the extraterrestrial.
They're supposed to be in the know. They're supposed to be on the front end, all that.
Exactly. And I think most people kind of assume that the government would cover something up like that because of national security reasons. And I guess we can assume that also the government might tell NASA to shut their mouth about it, but NASA is supposed to be this noble enterprise that their whole organization is constituted around the enterprise of making discoveries in space, right? And pushing the boundaries further and further in terms of our exploration of space. And you would think that the extraterrestrial life, the discovery of proof of extraterrestrial life would be the most important activity, the most important information and exploration that NASA would be engaged in and want to inform the public of. So they got a real problem over there. I think it's important to remember that NASA is, for all intents and purposes, the dog and pony show as it pertains to space. And so is Elon Musk now, and
that's what I was saying.
So is Jeff Bezos. I believe, and I'm going to say this with a degree of confidence because I've talked to people behind the scenes.
Don't get me started on Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and all the other tech billionaires that run the world. Don't get me started on that, please.
Who have relatives who were involved in these projects and have confirmed this to me. I believe that when we went to the moon, and right there, having said that, lots of people are going to get angry at me for having dared to suggest that we actually did go to the moon, because I think a lot of people.
We did both. We faked it and we went. All the footage we see is faked, but we did go.
And probably, in this.
That's the thing. People always try to make everything black and white, Oh, either this or that happened. It can only be this. It can only be that. No. It can be all things, all the time, at any time.
Audience, I would guess a lot of people probably think that was all just a hoax and that we filmed it and so forth. But when we went to the moon, we discovered a presence on the moon. We weren't the first ones to land there. In fact, one source told me they discovered debris from what looked to be an ancient crash of some kind of an advanced spacecraft. It would have to be a spacecraft, right? If it's crashed on the moon. And that they were being watched. And when I inquired, watched by whom, the answer was saucers. Doesn't only imply the Greys, but it's most likely the Greys if you're talking about saucers on the moon.
So that's why we haven't gone back.
So this is sort of I think a better conspiracy than we didn't go. I think we did go, and the astronauts were not allowed to talk about what they actually discovered, and that would explain their crestfallen countenance at that famous press conference in the aftermath of the expedition, when they all just looked like they were completely bummed out.
They're muzzled.
And maybe a little bit, and angry, confused. And everybody says, see, they didn't go. That's why they're so upset about it. Well, for one, it wouldn't make any sense that they would be upset about something that they knew was going to be a hoax from the beginning, would it?
No.
No. That doesn't make any sense. Like, hey, we're going to hoax this whole thing, and then you guys are going to do a press conference. So why would they decide to be all pissed off at the press conference and, bummed out when they were in on the whole thing? It doesn't make any sense. It's much more logical to propose that they were so crestfallen, they were so depressed and angry because they were not allowed to tell the public about what they actually discovered. The most important discovery humanity has ever made, and they had to shut their mouths. And so there was faking of footage because they couldn't show you what they actually found. So they had
saying he's preaching to the choir. That's exactly what I just said.
They had to put on the dog and pony show. They had to show you footage from a much less fantastic expedition, one that was benign for all intents and purposes. It was benign compared at least to what they actually discovered. And so that would explain why there would be elements of a hoax involved, not because they didn't go, but because they did. And what they discovered was that they weren't the first to land on the moon.
Yeah.
And that somebody else not only has been there and from what I heard in a very ancient context, but also is there currently with advanced aerospace vehicles, saucers,
like a moon base.
And so at that point, what would happen? Let's say, for the sake of argument, that is what happened. Okay, so what would happen next? So NASA and, of course, the military is watching all of this unfold with great interest. Part of the reason why we went to the moon was to get ahead of the Russians.
Right.
Don't forget.
Space race.
It was a space war. So the military is watching this with great interest and is directly involved. But as soon as something as important as discovering a wreckage of an ancient landing on the moon, or at least that somebody was there before us, and especially if we were being watched while we were there, the military would immediately take over that project. Immediately. It would be taken out of the hands of NASA and it would go into the classified projects of the military, of the Air Force specifically. And it would be locked away there. And so NASA would be told behind the scenes, you're not going to the moon again, number one, so go do other things. This is now a military prerogative. This is not something that the general public gets to know about. This is now classified. You guys are now going to be focused on other things, and we're taking this whole project over. That's what would happen. Okay. And I believe that is exactly what happened. Going to the moon became the sole prerogative of the military, specifically probably the Air Force, if there wasn't a whole new agency created, a whole new department created upon the discovery of intelligent extraterrestrials, or at least others, whoever they were, that were on the moon when we got there. So that and think about it. I want you just to think about this conspiracy theory that I just laid out. It answers all of the questions, doesn't it? It explains everything. It explains some of the videos that were hoaxed. It explains the different anomalies that people have pointed out about the project, the Apollo mission. It explains, again, the crestfallen countenance of the three guys at the press conference that went to the moon. It explains why NASA hasn't gone back. It explains everything. It literally answers all the questions.
Yeah. So you think that perhaps the government found out about these craft in the 30s, around the Roswell days, and then there's a specific reason that they went to the moon then, 30 years later?
I think that the project was initiated in response to the Soviet Union. We knew that the Soviet Union was trying to be the first in space, which they were with Sputnik. We knew that they wanted to dominate that theater, which would potentially become a theater of war, and we couldn't let them get ahead of us. I think it's that easy. It's that straightforward. And so we put forth a tremendous effort and invested a tremendous amount of money to get there first. The Russians were the first, the Soviets were the first in space. We were going to be the first on the moon.
Yeah.
And I believe that, remember, it was JFK who initiated this. I believe that it was initiated in good faith, and it was a tremendous achievement. by the United States. And so I don't need to look beyond those motivations. I think those motivations explain everything.
Do you think that, so we go, we see things we don't like, we come back, and the governments get together and be like, this is what we actually saw on the moon?
The governments or just the agencies in our government?
The agencies, but other governments too, because how come no other countries have tried to go to the moon? And
I don't think we would have shared that information with them, but we might have threatened them behind the scenes. We might have said, hey, moon's off limits to you. We'll consider it an act of war if you try and go there. Who knows? Of course, the Chinese have been making inroads as of late, but there's nothing we can do about that at this point. There may be some sharing of information behind the scenes about the Greys, because don't forget that the UFO phenomenon is not an American phenomenon. It's global.
Sure.
We can't control what's happening in China in terms of the
I feel like most stuff I see comes out of Mexico.
Exactly. So if the Greys decide to make contact with the Chinese government, with the Chinese Communist government, there's nothing we can do about that. So because the nature of the phenomenon is completely out of our control, there has to be some kind of information sharing on a global scale, because everybody's involved in this phenomenon. And we know, our government certainly knows that other governments know about UFOs. So who knows what was happening behind the scenes? But that's why I'm, from this day forward, referring to not the deep state, but the dumb state, which is literally the deep state, miles under the ground, where many of these projects are underway in terms of these projects to reverse engineer alien technology and so forth. And one of you guys mentioned the possibility of the U.S. military, elements of the U.S. military or military contractors literally working with the entities, with the Greys. And I think it's plausible personally, but there's no proof.
Right.
You can't, there's no way to prove it. We can prove that UFOs are real. That's easy. That's not hard at this point. We can prove that alien abductions are real. That is within the realm of scientific proof. But so far,
that is true. That is true.
There's no way for anybody to prove that elements of the U.S. government, or any government, military, I should say, or military contractors, are working directly with alien entities. Now, there's guys like Phil Schneider, who I know for a fact that elements of Phil Schneider's stories were true. Everything.
Yeah, that guy, he didn't just end up dead for no reason. He didn't end up dead for no reason. He didn't just kill himself. The guy was going on tours telling the world about all this fucking crazy shit he was doing, and he knew he was going to end up being killed. He said he would be killed, and he was.
Thing he said, I doubt that the entirety of his story was true. I think he was involved in, I think he was a participant in some of the, maybe an unwilling participant in some of the MK Ultra stuff.
And for those listening, Phil Schneider was like in a war with them underground.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
got shot at by these aliens.
He shot one with his pistol, and then he got in his words, they crispy crittered him. A gray-like being, tall though, not small, a tall gray-like entity. Gray-like meaning the Greys, that was sort of shaped like them in terms of the bulbous head and the big black eyes, the almond-shaped eyes, waved its hand in front of its chest, and according to Phil's testimony, a blue light emanated from the being's chest, or a device on the being's chest, and struck him and burned off his fingers, a couple of his fingers and his toes, and gave him cancer.
Wow.
And he was almost...
Man, Tim Alberino, he's such a smooth talker. So smooth. I wish I could speak like him.
Dang.
He almost died. I mean, he was on his deathbed for a while there after that incident, but he recovered. So I believe much of what Phil said, but there's other elements of his story that I'm doubtful of. And again, the reason why is because I think that Phil Schneider, his father, by the way, was Phil's father or grandfather was a Nazi submarine captain,
U-boat captain,
or maybe an admiral. I can't remember. Maybe you guys do. It was a U-boat. That's right. U-boat is more accurate than submarine. And I don't remember if he was a captain or an admiral, but when you have a family like that that's got those kind of connections that were brought over in Operation Paperclip, you're often going to find those individuals having been subjected to some kind of mind control, MK Ultra, multiple personality type stuff. So they're complicated people,
Yeah.
and so you have to be careful. You have to believe what can be verified, and in Phil's case, much of what he said, I believe, can be verified. Much of what he said can be verified. I mean, and just to put a bow on that, for example, nobody was talking about magneto-leviton trains back in the early 90s, except for Phil Schneider. Phil Schneider was talking about magneto-leviton trains. He described them perfectly. He said they can go coast to coast in a half an hour. They float on a 1/4 inch, electromagnetic wave, and they run in a vacuum, and everybody laughed at him. And now China's building them above ground.
So what we bring to this whole conversation is the gospel, obviously, right? And that's the part of the story that I think a lot of these guys can't go into. They can't talk about, well, who are these grays and these aliens all? What are they allegiant to? Who controls all this? There's a spiritual narrative to it all. What I love about your work, Tim, is that you take it to the next level. And if NASA's trying to get ahead of the game, a lot of Christians are asking themselves, are there people in direct link with Satan? And they're
Yes.
all working to disclose this on their terms, in their way, and with their narrative,
That's a good point, because
Tell you what, man, things are about to get fucking real crazy. Everything in the Bible, the stuff in ancient Sumerian tablets, the ancient Aztecs, all of the ancient cultures, they all talk about how civilization has repeated itself, built itself up, been destroyed, and repeat. And it's happened a few times. There are people in the know that know about this stuff. They've been passing down this knowledge for forever, and they're in the know. They're in the club. I mean, what does it take to be in a club? A group of people that know each other and can keep a secret, basically. So the idea of secret societies is very real. They're rampant. I mean, just look at public communities, like a Twitch community or the YouTube community. I'm sure there are people within the communities that speak to one another, and a lot of stuff doesn't go out on stream or on a video. So it's basically just a secret conversation. That's all it is. It's so simple, and people try to make it out to be this big conspiratorial thing. It's not. It's so simple.
NASA consulting with theologians, indirectly, of course, for the fact checkers. NASA consulting directly with the Center of Theological Inquiry at Princeton. There's the actual situation.
Theologians by proxy.
By
proxy, yeah.
Which isn't any less astonishing. Is nothing compared to what the Vatican has been doing, and the Vatican has been directly involved in the theological framing of disclosure, let's say, and probably other things beyond that. The Vatican has been much more interested in this question than NASA, because everybody, so this is the way that the head turning would go. It would, first you got the disclosure from the Pentagon. Let's say that if that's how it happened, then the next head turn is to NASA, and then the next head turn for many people is to the Pope, is to the Vatican.
Yeah.
Because what does this mean? Well, hold on. At least for the Christian world, what does this mean? Most Christians, and again, we've talked about this at length, and it's the topic of my book, Birthright, by the way, which you guys know. Most Christians have no context for.
No, I have not read that. I have not read that book. Probably should, but no, I haven't.
Extraterrestrial life, even though we are all reading a book that presumes the reality of extraterrestrial life, and that is the Bible. And
another thing I want to say is I'm very well rounded in the UFO subject. I look at it from all points of view, everything from a scientific point of view to a theological point of view to an atheist an atheistic point of view, all of them. They're all very important.
So the context for understanding this is right in front of us as Christians. It's right there. And it has nothing to do with the Nephilim or anything like that. So it's not that angle. It's actually much older, much more ancient than the Nephilim.
The Nephilim. So when I think of like Bigfoot, that's what comes to mind for me is pre-humans. Like what's really going on in the book of Genesis with Adam and Eve. I think those were pre-humans. I think they were probably more like Bigfoot type creatures than they were to us modern day humans. That's just my guess, my theory. But yeah, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
It's the beings who were the fathers of the Nephilim. It's their civilization, it's their race that pre-existed humanity that is featured throughout the scriptures, Old Testament and New Testament, as we all know. And these beings demand an explanation in terms of the biblical paradigm, the narrative of the Hebrew scriptures.
A lot of people think that the fallen angels, the fathers of the Nephilim, are what the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. That's one theory. Another theory is that the Nephilim are they're giants, but what we call demons are the souls, the lost souls of these dead giants just wandering the earth, supposedly. Yeah. A lot of different angles, a lot of different explanations for different things. It's all very interesting when you look into it.
They demand an explanation. And I would say they demand an explanation in the context of what we know today in terms of our understanding of the universe. And the explanation, I think, is forthcoming. I think it's evident that this is a race of beings that hail from an advanced, ancient civilization that exists somewhere in the cosmos of creation. It is somewhere in created order, probably in the literal universe, not in a different dimension or something like that. Probably in the literal universe, somewhere out there. They come from somewhere. They have an origin. They didn't just pop into existence. And I mean, even Adam didn't just pop into existence. His biology was carefully crafted, and he has a beginning. And Adam is earthborn. We are all earthborn, but they are not. They pre-exist the earth, clearly.
We are all beings of light. Everything is light. It's just light vibrating at different frequencies to create different densities of matter. You know, hard stuff, structure. You can literally make that out of light.
According to Job. And so that's a galactic narrative. That's a cosmic narrative. And that is the narrative of Scripture. So we don't have to wonder how extraterrestrials fit into the biblical narrative. It's self-evident that they do. And so if you're a Bible-believing Christian, then by default, you believe in extraterrestrials, by default. Now, you may not know that you do, but you do. By default, you believe in extraterrestrials. Yeah, an extraterrestrial is simply a being whose provenance is not planet Earth, period. And their provenance, them being who I call the elder race, who are ambiguously designated in the biblical narrative as angels, they obviously hail from an extraterrestrial provenance. They are therefore extraterrestrials. So I think that it's really, really, and this.
And the big question for me is, how do we know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? You know, how do we know that these aliens flying around, or UFOs, whatever you want to call them, they're flying around, and people won't automatically assume that they're demonic. A lot of people on the Christian side of things. I think it's wrong to just assume those things, but don't get me wrong, like there's so many reports of like negative type beings, you know, cattle mutilations and face peelers and all this crazy shit out there that freaks me out. But at the same time, there also has to be a positive side of things. There's good and evil and everything, good, light and dark. I mean, as above, so below. It's all 100% true.
This is part of the reason, by the way, why I agreed to do this conference, is because I believe that it is so important for Christians especially to have a paradigm, a correct paradigm, not invent a new one, but have a biblical paradigm into which extraterrestrials naturally fit. Of course, the question of salvation comes up, and this is a question that the Vatican is very much interested in, but they're drawing the wrong conclusions, because that question is also already answered in the scriptures. And of course, the question is, well, if Christ died for human beings, then are we to suppose also that he died for some other faction of aliens elsewhere in the universe? And the answer is no. Clearly, according to the...
I was going to say yes, because if there was a Christ-like being, why couldn't he exist in all planets, all realities? Why does it have to just be here? I don't like putting limits on things.
The scriptures, because the scriptures make it clear that Christ did not die for the angels, that amazingly, he died just for us, just for the human species. Now,
That's true. That's true.
Sacrifice, his victory at the cross has cosmic implications, certainly, but we don't have...
But see, this also comes down to the Bible being written by man, I don't know. I have a hard time. Like, how are we supposed to trust anything that we read, see? Like, I'd rather trust what I see, or like see and feel, touch, taste, my senses, than what's being told or written. Yeah, it's so hard to make out what's true and what's not, and it's designed that way to keep us confused, for sure.
Have to assume that if Christ died for the human species, then he died for some other alien species somewhere else in the cosmos, and that turns the gospel on its head. There's no reason to think in those terms. And yet, for some reason, the Vatican keeps going there.
Why do you think they are?
Well, they're crafting a whole new gospel that includes extraterrestrials. So they're not deferring to the biblical narrative, and they're not understanding extraterrestrials as they naturally appear in the scriptures. Instead, they're redefining the gospel.
Is that because most of the world lives in this medieval thinking about the angelic and the angels, and not that this all interacts, and that there's got to be salvation, right? You got to graft the ETs in as well, because there's salvation for all, instead of understanding that these beings exist in the kingdom of heaven.
That may explain some of the more innocent contemplations by members of the clergy.
Okay.
At the Vatican. But I think there's something much more insidious going on. I believe, and when I say the Vatican, of course, the Vatican is composed of a diverse group of individuals and organizations and orders and so forth. But generally speaking, the hierarchy at the Vatican, I believe, are getting ready to receive the Antichrist as the return of Christ himself, that he's going to be presented to the world as this superior extraterrestrial being. And as many have postulated, that he's going to be received as the savior of the world, him and his cohort, his consort, which I refer to as Apollo and his consort in my book, that these beings are going to be received as gods and are going to lead the world into
great delusion, right?
Into the post-human age, basically, into the post-human paradigm.
Well, I mean, what I really like about what you said just a minute ago is just like how it feels like there's this hierarchy, this chain of command, right? It's like a kid, he's gonna look to his mom, and his mom's gonna look to the dad. You know what I mean? Like we look to our local governments. They're gonna look to the president, and the president's gonna look to the Vatican. Ultimately, it's a spiritual question at the end of the day.
It comes down to us at the end of the day. Us. Tell you what, with my experiences, just the other night I had a major out of body experience when I was doing meditation with binaural beats, and I was going through a tough time. I'll just leave it at that. And dude, it was like a DMT trip. Literally, I was just on the verge of falling asleep, and it was like I fucking blasted off on DMT, like higher than I've ever been on DMT, and I've done DMT, and it was so good. Like, as soon as I woke up from it, I wanted more. Like, I wanted to go back to that state. It was incredible. It was really weird, the stuff that happened in that dream, that state. I'm not going to go into detail. That's a story from another day, but I'll just leave it at that.
Today, what does this mean for human existence? Like, we're gonna look right past our governments, and we're gonna look right to the Vatican, because they're the biggest religious entity in the world, and they're gonna tell us what this all means.
Yes, that's true. And the Vatican is going to have an answer.
Yeah.
And most Protestant pastors aren't going to have an answer, not an adequate
Yep.
one. Because if you ask most Protestant pastors, if you ask them, are extraterrestrials real? Are aliens real? Do they exist? And most pastors will laugh that off. Of course not. No. Or some will say, oh, they're demons. They're just demons. Those are just demons or fallen angels, right? Those aren't good answers. If you ask me, hey, Tim, do extraterrestrials exist within the biblical paradigm? My answer is yes. Of course.
See, this is a very important subject to me. I've actually been reaching out to a church in my local area just to talk about these things, because people need to start being prepared. Like, seriously. Like, for someone that doesn't believe in the whole paradigm of UFOs and aliens, and then all of a sudden they find out that it's all real and it's like right in front of them, they're gonna lose their fucking minds. They're gonna lose their shit. They're gonna fucking freak out, and it's gonna be bad. A lot of people are gonna be freaking out, and it's our job to prepare people for this stuff. And that's why I take it real serious when it comes to this stuff. It's important. So yeah, I've been reaching out. I've been talking to a local church about this. I told them basically that I was abducted by aliens, and just left it at that. Let them kind of talk among themselves, and they got back to me. So yeah, we'll just see how it goes. But yeah, I think it's really important that people share their experiences and start talking about this stuff in the public. It doesn't. I don't care if someone thinks I'm crazy, and neither should you. Fuck them. Fuck them all. Who cares?
They do. Of course they do. So if there's a disclosure of an extraterrestrial presence, I'm not going to be surprised. I expect that to be the case already.
Right.
Because again, I believe that the biblical narrative presupposes this reality. So I'm not going to be surprised. It comfortably fits into my worldview. It's not going to shake my faith one bit. I already expect that to be the case.
So, hey, Tim, with that context, I got a question. I've been wanting to ask this from the beginning, because we've unwrapped with you in past episodes abductions, and we presuppose that these different types of extraterrestrials. So with that whole narrative that we talked about, sort of the end there, what do you think is happening right now? Why are they going and they buzzing nuclear sites? Why are they going and buzzing top secret sites? What do you think is, we don't know this, but what do you think is happening? Because
they're flexing. That's what they're doing. They're letting them know, like, look, you guys can't do a fucking thing. Look what we can do. Look, oh, you think these things are cool? These things are badass? Look what we can do. We'll fucking turn these off and turn them on your own fucking countries. Like, yeah, it's a flex. They're flexing hard.
we would expect this to end in some crescendo where we have this ultimate Antichrist figure who is extraterrestrial, who's coming to, bring peace and save us from ourselves. That's the narrative.
That's the narrative, and that's what worries me, because I could totally see that happening. At the same time, it's like, how do we actually know who's the good guys and who's the bad guys? Like, you have the whole Bible out there, and then you have like these people, Luciferians, or people that worship Satan or whatever. They see Satan as the true God, the Lord of Light and all that shit. Like, so it's and they believe it 100%. So it's like, who's who, you know? So I just choose to base things off of my own personal experience and just leave it at that. And I think everyone should just do the same.
Narrative, right? But what's happening right now? Why do you think is it to say that we have no control over our own airspace? Is it something else nefarious? Especially when we talk about the different factions that you kind of laid out in past episodes.
Exactly. Right.
What do you think? What do you suppose is going on?
Well, you have to identify who they are. So,
the UFOs. I mean, yeah.
Are they? I would say most of the UFO activity are the Greys, but they're not the only ones in possession of advanced aerospace craft. These entities that we call "quote unquote" fallen angels,
right,
which I like to refer to, which I think is much more accurate to refer to them as the apostate sons of God, the insurrectionists, the real insurrectionists. They're in possession of the same technology, if not greater technology. So those guys, who in my book I make the case that those are elder siblings, good and bad, right? The good ones and the bad ones are not two distinct races. The good guys and the bad guys, they're the same race. They're not. It's not like there's a race of good angels and then there's a race of bad angels. It's not like the good angels,
Right. And so it's like, how do we know? We can't tell. We have no idea how to tell, except for what's based on their actions and what we see and experience.
Speak one language and use one kind of technology, and the bad angels speak a different language and use a different kind of tech. No, they come from the same civilization. They have the same knowledge. They look exactly the same. Now, whether they dress the same or not, I don't know. but
the bad ones
same,
wear all black all the time.
They're the same race. Those guys have been around since the beginning. So there's your ancient astronaut theory.
Right.
That's the part of it that I agree with. Have extraterrestrials been interacting with human beings since the beginning of human history? Yes. I mean, Eve was talking to one of them in the garden. So yes, the answer is yes. It wasn't a snake, and it wasn't a reptilian either, by the way. It was a 30-some looking young blonde guy with either blonde or golden blonde hair and probably blue or green eyes. That's my guess. It wasn't a snake. The snake is a reference to his primary attribute, cunning. He's cunning. So that's that faction. That's that angelic or.
And that's the other interesting thing. Like, you hear about, the snake in the Garden of Eden. Then you hear about these like reptilian beings and these reptilian creatures that live in the earth, or they come and they like, they feed off your fear and all this crazy shit. Like, what the fuck, dude? What the fuck?
Quote unquote fallen angelic faction. They've been here since the beginning. They're operating in our airspace. I believe they literally inhabit the earth, probably, in some underground base beneath the mountains or something.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm talking about the devil here. I don't think he's some spiritual entity that lives in hell. That's wrong. That's medieval. That's a medieval perspective. That's not correct. These are physical beings who use technology, and they are inhabiting the earth in the same way we inhabit the earth, except for they're probably under the earth. And again, they've been here since the beginning. Then we have this other faction, and there may be more. I always say this, there may be more factions. I don't know. There may be more. But then we have this other faction, the Greys. These are the Grey. These are your typical bulbous shaped head, almond shaped eyes, little gray guys, and then they're insectoid overlords, which look like praying mantises, somewhat like praying mantises. That faction is involved in alien abductions.
That's the story. That's the rumor. I've heard some weird sounds when I was seeing stuff in my backyard, clicking noises in my ear. I woke up the other week and had a metallic chipmunk voice telling me to go outside in my ear. Not like a thought in your head. Not a thought in your head, but in my ear, like an actual voice. I heard that first and only time in my life I've actually heard a voice in my ear. It was so fucking weird. And no, I didn't go outside. It was like 7 in the morning, raining, cold, and I was going through some shit. So no, I wasn't going outside. I was like, nope, I'm gonna lay right here and just go back to sleep. Thanks.